Toward the end of 1966, the Beatles found themselves at a point no pop band had ever reached before. They had conquered stages around the world, ignited mass hysteria across continents, and redefined the meaning of fame itself. Stadiums had fallen silent in their wake. Records sold in numbers previously unimaginable, and their influence stretched far beyond music into fashion, politics, and youth culture. Yet it was precisely at this peak, when most artists would have fought to maintain momentum, that the Beatles made one of the boldest decisions of their career. They stopped touring altogether. Their final performance at Candlestick Park in San Francisco was not simply the end of a tour schedule, it was a symbolic closing of an entire way of life. Exhausted by the chaos of live performances, frustrated by the limitations of sound systems, and increasingly threatened by hostile crowds, the Beatles chose to abandon the stage in favor of the studio. They shut the door on life as a touring band and opened a new chapter defined entirely by creativity, control, and reinvention. Rather than retreating into quiet domestic life or basking in the legendary status they had already secured, the four musicians returned almost immediately to Abbey Road Studios with an intense, almost obsessive sense of purpose. The studio was no longer merely a place to document songs, it became a laboratory, a canvas, and an instrument in its own right. Freed from the need to perform songs live, the Beatles now felt empowered to imagine music without boundaries. Sounds could be layered endlessly, structures could collapse and reform, and songs no longer had to conform to conventional pop expectations. This shift became even more pronounced when John Lennon rejoined the band after completing filming for Richard Lester's anti-war satire, How I Won the War. Lennon returned physically changed, his hair cropped short, his demeanor more withdrawn, but more importantly, he came back psychologically transformed. The experience had forced him into isolation and introspection, offering long stretches of idle time in which his thoughts turned inward. Out of this period emerged a gentle, introspective folk song inspired by vivid childhood memories of Liverpool. Specifically, a garden belonging to a Salvation Army children's home called Strawberry Fields, a place Lennon had played near as a child. Yet from the beginning, the song was more than simple reminiscence. Strawberry Fields Forever carried an emotional ambiguity that set it apart from anything Lennon had written before. It felt confessional, uncertain, and psychologically exposed. When Lennon presented the early version to Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr, the reaction was immediate. This was not nostalgia dressed in sentimentality, it was a radical inward turn. The song seemed to question reality itself, blurring the line between memory, imagination, and identity. The band understood that they were stepping into unfamiliar creative territory, one that demanded patience, experimentation, and risk. The recording process soon became one of the most complex and painstaking in the Beatles' entire catalog. Abbey Road Studios was treated not just as a recording space, but as a vast musical mechanism. Tape loops were created and manipulated, instruments were filtered through unfamiliar effects, and multiple takes were recorded as the band searched for a sound that could capture the song's dreamlike instability. Mellotrons, backward recordings, orchestral textures, and ambient noise were woven together to form a sonic landscape that felt fluid and disorienting. Even for George Martin, already recognized as one of the most innovative producers of the era, Strawberry Fields Forever posed an extraordinary challenge. Martin later admitted that translating Lennon's abstract vision into sound was among the most demanding tasks of his career. The song refused to settle into a single form, constantly evolving with each new attempt. The greatest obstacle emerged when Lennon, after approving several recorded takes, made an unprecedented request. He wanted to combine two different versions of the song, both favorites of his, despite the fact that they were recorded in different tempos and different keys. From a technical standpoint, this was close to impossible. Conventional recording rules simply did not allow for such manipulation. Yet, it was precisely in this moment that George Martin's technical mastery and creative courage came to the fore. By altering tape speed, slowing one take down while speeding the other up, Martin managed to align their pitch and tempo closely enough to splice them together. The transition, which occurs roughly a minute into the final track, is nearly imperceptible, yet it contributes profoundly to the song's uncanny atmosphere. The finished recording feels suspended between realities, as though the listener is drifting through Lennon's subconscious. When the song was finally complete, a new dilemma arose: how to release it. The Beatles had gone too long without issuing a single, and commercial expectations from EMI were growing. The solution was to release Strawberry Fields Forever as a double A-side single alongside Paul McCartney's Penny Lane. Both songs explored childhood memories, yet they stood in stark emotional contrast. McCartney's piece bright and orderly, Lennon's murky and introspective. From a marketing perspective, the decision was sound. Artistically, however, George Martin would later describe it as the greatest regret of his professional life. In interviews with Rolling Stone and other publications, Martin admitted that a song as innovative and structurally radical as Strawberry Fields Forever deserved a permanent place on an album, specifically Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. That album would go on to define the psychedelic era and reshape the possibilities of popular music. Listening to Sgt. Pepper today, it is difficult not to imagine how seamlessly Strawberry Fields Forever would have fit among Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, and A Day in the Life. Its themes of fractured perception, its studio experimentation, and its emotional honesty align perfectly with the album's conceptual ambition. Martin felt that by excluding the track, Sgt. Pepper lost a vital piece of its artistic architecture. Though the album remains widely regarded as flawless, for Martin, there was always the sense that something essential had been left behind, a feeling that lingered with him for the rest of his life. Eventually, the song found another home on the Magical Mystery Tour album. Ironically, the television film associated with the project was met with confusion and harsh criticism, yet the album itself became a crucial document of the Beatles' experimental period, bringing together non-album singles such as I Am the Walrus, Blue Jay Way, and Strawberry Fields Forever into a cohesive psychedelic statement. John Lennon later described the song as a form of musical self-analysis. In a 1980 interview, he recalled how his role in How I Won the War unexpectedly gave him 6 uninterrupted weeks of waiting on location in Almeria, Spain. In the boredom and isolation of film production, he wrote, reflected, and slowly assembled fragments of memory and thought that would crystallize into the song. No matter how listeners first encountered it, as a single, a soundtrack highlight, or a classic track on later compilations, Strawberry Fields Forever marked a decisive turning point in the evolution of rock music. It demonstrated that the recording studio could function as a primary instrument, that pop songs did not need to obey traditional structures, and that vulnerability and uncertainty could be powerful artistic tools. George Martin may have carried one enduring regret throughout his life, yet through that regret, the full importance of Strawberry Fields Forever becomes clear. It is not merely a Beatles song, it is a moment when popular music stepped into the modern age, shaped by courage, imagination, experimentation, in one decision that almost changed everything.